Hi, I'm Mike Stephen and this is Gear Up. Today we're going to talk about alpine bindings. And a lot of people know that there's safety in alpine bindings and there's all sorts of things that need to be adjusted to keep your knees safe in the binding. I'm going to explain a little bit of that so that you have a little bit of understanding and hopefully bindings will make a little bit more sense for you, and then hopefully you'll also be able to choose the binding that's right for you. So the first thing we're going to go over is DIN. DIN is the number that we set your binding at depending on your height, your weight, your age, your skier ability, and your boot sole length. So we need all those pieces of information to determine your DIN. DIN is found right here, and it's a number depending on the binding. It's a number that is universal across all bindings. So if you've got a 2 on this binding, it's a 2 on another manufacturer's binding. So a 2 in DIN is an international standard. This is the DIN chart that we use to figure out the DIN number to set your binding at, and it'll set your toe DIN and your heel DIN, because there's DIN in both places. And what DIN is, in essence, it's the point at which the binding will release. So the torque value on the toe piece and the torque value on the heel piece at which it is unsafe for your knee or your leg and the binding will release. So the other adjustments that are on the binding, and to calculate that DIN number, the reason why I didn't go into it, not because it's a trade secret, is because there's a lot of things that go into it. Our technicians actually have to get certified every single year, and they do a test that proves that they have the skills to be able to navigate a DIN chart, because there is a lot of information taken into account on that DIN chart. So the DIN is on the toe and the heel. The next thing that there's a forward pressure adjustment. So forward pressure is the adjustment of the length of the boot. So that's fine-tuned. And there's a screw on the back of the binding, and what you want is when you step into the binding, you want the forward pressure adjustment to be in the range. What that's allowing the binding to do is the correct pressure front to back. If you look, I don't know if I'll be able to know if I'm strong enough. I doubt I am. No, I can't move it enough. But this moves on a track on a spring. And that pressure is adjusted through this screw so that this heel actually travels back and forth as you're skiing. So that's your forward pressure adjustment. There can be more adjustments than what I'm mentioning as well on bindings, but this binding has majority of the adjustments. This right here is a toe height adjustment. So how high the toe is, depending on how high your toes are, because not all boot soles are the same. So boot soles can be very different, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes here. But the height of the toe piece is very important. The heel is just spring-loaded and floats, so it can auto-adjust. The toe needs to be adjusted up and down so that it's snug. We've got a card that we put underneath, and it's the perfect thickness between boot sole, there's your boot sole, and the sliding AFD. This one has a sliding AFD, which is probably one of the safer systems out there, and the system that fits the most boot soles. So when talking about boot soles, I'll do one more thing. Some bindings have a wing adjustment. These are the wings of the binding, and the wings can move in and out. So it pincers or grabs the sides of your boot. You can adjust that so that it's just snug to the boot's edge. It's not pushing and squishing back, or it's not so loose that you're getting side-to-side play. Your binding, when you lift up your ski and kind of wobble it, should feel secure on your feet. If you're feeling wobble in any way, you should get your binding adjusted and looked at by a certified technician. So the next thing that we're going to go into is explaining a little bit about boot soles. I chose this boot in specific because it's a boot that has more of a touring sole on it. Touring soles are fairly obvious on boots. They're softer rubber, they're usually luggier and grippier, and they're designed for backcountry skiing. They will work on hill with some bindings. This is where you have to be very careful. When you buy an alpine boot with an alpine sole, there's an ISO number on the bottom of it. Most alpine boots are 1 ISO number, and they'll fit in pretty much any binding out there. That's the vast majority. When you get into touring soles, that's where it starts to get confusing, or walk soles, or whatever you want to call them. There's a bunch of different names in the industry for them. But there's soles that are rubber versus plastic, and they're luggier. With those, you need to really know your stuff of which binding will work with which boot. So do be careful the moment you get into rubber soles, or if you're purchasing a binding or purchasing a boot, make sure that it's compatible. There is some charts out there on the internet that will tell you what ISO number, and as long as you know that you need to match the ISO number, which is basically the durometer or the boot sole, the information of the boot sole is the ISO number, usually found on the boot sole. Really small, hard to read. And then just make sure that that ISO number is compatible with your binding. If you're having problems with that, obviously your local shop can definitely help you out with that and figure out what binding would be best for you. So that's going over a little bit of the information on bindings. I want to bring to light a new binding that's out there that's really kind of cool. So this is a Warden 13. This isn't the binding I want to talk about. But the reason why I'm saying Warden 13, this is a 13 DIN binding, so it's a very aggressive binding designed for skiers that really push their skiing ability. So a binding like this is designed to be beat up and abused on the hill all day long. Touring bindings in the past have not been designed to do that. Whereas this binding, you're able to push this binding as hard on the hill as off the hill. And what I mean by off the hill, this is the new shift binding. And the shift binding has the ability to tour up for backcountry tours and ski down. If you just want to use this as a pretty darn expensive on-hill binding, you can, because it meets all DIN standards for a standard ski boot. So if you just wanted this because you thought it looked cool or whatever, or thought you might want a backcountry in the future, you can get this binding and it will do everything that that Warden 13 will do. However, what's different about this binding is that it's a fairly light binding with a pin system. So it's able to do all that other stuff, and then on top of that, it's able to tour up. So what I mean by that is you take this toe piece, you flick it down, the pins come out. What the pins are used with is the toe of a touring boot. So we talked about touring soles. Those are the pins in the front of the touring boot. So when you are touring up, that's how you're touring. The reason why pin systems are preferential to like a frame system or a frame backcountry binding is simply because you're not lifting the whole binding. All you're doing is pivoting on the boot. You're not lifting the binding up each time you come up, because a frame binding, you lift the binding. So you figure when you're climbing 3,000 feet of elevation, how many times you've lifted that 1.5 pounds. And for anybody that goes to the gym, even though it's a small amount of weight, if you do it 10,000 times, you're going to feel the effect of that. So this is an extremely efficient binding for climbing up. It's got heel raisers so that you can basically climb steeper terrain. And what actually happens is the first time you, when you put it into walk mode in the heel, the first time you step down on it, I don't know if I can do it with my hands. There we go, I gave it some help. It puts the brake out of the way for you. So the brake is now up. You're touring valley bottom here. Here you're starting to do a climb, so you're starting to go up. Then when you get to the top, the really cool thing about this binding is you just pull your foot out, you switch this forward, lock it down, you're in a full toe capture, so a regular downhill binding. You flip this out of the walk mode, or put your heel raiser down first, flip this out of the walk mode, down comes the binding, and you've got a regular step into. I don't know if this is size for this. Oh, it is actually. Not quite. Whoa. We'll see if I can force it. There we go. A regular downhill binding for coming down. So it's a regular kick in and go down the mountain. So this binding has been a long time in the coming, a binding that is really quite strong for on-hill performance and durable and has all the release values that you'd want in the downhill mode. So for safety in the backcountry, safety on the hill. And then for the tourer up part, it's got that pin system. So it kind of transforms into that pin system to go up efficiently. And it's kind of, they're calling it the holy grail of bindings because it's got the ability to do both incredibly well. Well, I hope I've shed a little bit of light on bindings and shown you some new tech out there in the industry. I'm Mike Stephen, and this is Gear Up. Hi, I'm Mike Stephen, and this is Gear Up. Today we're going to talk about snowshoes, and hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on what'll make you comfortable out snowshoeing and how to select snowshoes, what type you should get, because a lot of times it's a little bit ominous looking at a whole snowshoe wall and wondering which snowshoe works for you. So the first thing I'll say is snowshoes are very similar to a lot of winter product, like skis, snowboards, all that kind of stuff, that it's more dependent on your weight than it is your height or anything like that. The snowshoe cares how heavy you are. That's what's going to affect the flotation in the snow, and that's what's going to give you a good day out or a poor day out, depending on what you're looking for. So a snowshoe like this is a little bit more designed for packed trails. What I mean by packed trails are trails that have been broken in already, trails that people have already gone on. So there is going to be some fresh snow potentially on them, but you're not going to have the snowshoe sinking deep into the snow. It's primarily designed for grip, stability, and a little bit of flotation for this customer. So if you look down the sides of this, you can see these steel rails here that have got sharp teeth on them. That's going to give you fantastic grip and stability. Right here you've got a main toe crampon that again is going to give you amazing grip. I don't know if you can see that in there, but that toe crampon pivots with the snowshoe and gives you an amazing grip. So this customer, like I say, is going to be spending a little bit more time on the more groomed trails, a little bit less powder snow, maybe the more valley bottom trails and stuff like that. The benefit to this shoe for it to be, it is the grip of it and also is the size of it. It's significantly smaller than a shoe that's designed for powder. A shoe that's designed for powder is going to be much bigger, therefore a little bit harder to maneuver. So you definitely have an agile shoe out of this. So if you're just starting out snowshoeing, it might be a good idea to go to a snowshoe like this, and you'll be able to do all the valley bottom trails and get a little bit into the deeper snow. You'll sink slightly more than a big shoe, but you'll be able to get into that stuff. Next up, we'll talk about more of a mountain shoe. So this shoe is more designed for fresh snow or powder snow. So fresh and powder snow, it's very important that you size your snowshoe properly. Whereas in the on-groom stuff, it's not as important. There's usually just a couple of sizes, whereas there's a few more sizes in the powder shoe. The reason why is because you want to get the maximum flotation you can in powder snow, but you also don't want a shoe that's so big that it's hard to maneuver. So there's two ways you can select a snowshoe in terms of size. If you're doing powder snow, you're an experienced snowshoer, chances are you're just going to go for the biggest one. That way you get the most flotation and the bigger shoe isn't going to be too cumbersome. The second way to do it is by weight, and each manufacturer will specify what shoe is designed for what weight. So this is a 36, a 30 would sit down here, a 25 would sit even smaller. So Once you've sized your shoe and figured out what size you should get, the next thing you should consider is what style of binding, because you're going to see a bunch of mountain shoes and a bunch of shoes that are designed for valley bottom. The difference is going to be in the construction of the shoe. So how beefy the construction is or how strong the construction is, the material they're making the decking out of. So there's higher quality and lower quality deckings. In terms of the binding, there's going to be more comfortable and easier access bindings. Like this binding to get into, you just basically open it like that, open the heel up here with this lever, and you can slide into the shoe, snug it down, tighten it down on the heel. It's really quite quick and quite secure. It's a very comfortable binding, and it's a very easy binding to get in or out of. The other thing that you're going to see on a mountain shoe more often is you're going to see a heel raiser. So when you start getting into the steeper terrain and climbing up, you want the heel raiser so that you basically, if you picture yourself on the slope, you don't want your heel going all the way down to the bottom flat to the deck, because that's a waste of energy. You can have your heel just stop and land on the shoe, and that way you're not going all the way to the bottom each step. You're able to gain about 3 inches of height. That way you have more energy to get to the top. Other than that, in snowshoes, you're just gonna, some people are gonna have a preference in kind of manufacture, all that kind of stuff. Some people will have a preference whether it's a pivoting toe piece off a pin. This is a pin setup so that it just pivots on a steel bar. Others pivot on the material that actually fixes the shoe, so it's a material that kind of flexes and bends. I personally like a hinged shoe like this. The reason why I like that is because when you step into a deep snow hole, as you step out of it, because you are going to sink with snowshoes. That's another thing that I should mention. A lot of people think that you should just float on top of any snow. No, it makes snow travel possible where it would be impossible otherwise. So you're still going to sink into deep powder snow a little bit, but you're actually going to be able to walk in it. And when you sink into the snow collapses around the snowshoe, and when you lift your foot up, the binding automatically pivots and dumps the snow that's on the back of the deck off, so you're not having to lift all that snow out of the hole that you've just made. So I find that this style of shoe works really well. What else can we go over on snowshoes? I think we're kind of, that's most of the information on snowshoes. We'll talk a little bit about one more thing, which is a pole. Definitely poles make a lot of sense when you're out snowshoeing. You can snowshoe without poles, but then you're just kind of missing this whole upper body that can help you down the trail or up the mountain or wherever you're going. So I recommend a height adjustable pole. So a pole that you can adjust the height of. So adjusting the height of this pole is simply done by this cam lever here and then just stretching the pole. I do recommend cam levers versus twist lock poles. Twist lock poles have problems with freezing up. And when it's frozen up inside, you can't deal with it until you get into a warm situation. Whereas cam lock, all the moving parts are on the outside. If something freezes up, you can deal with it out in the field and solve it. So I highly recommend a cam lock system versus a twist lock system. The reason why I recommend adjustable poles is depending on what you're going up. For going up mountains and such, you're usually not going straight up the mountain, you're going on a side hill. So you're going to have one pole that's long on the downward side and a pole that's short on the uphill side. That way you're not like this. You can have the short pole here, the long pole reaching down, and then when you make a switchback, you just switch hands and you've got the correct pole in the correct hand when you make a switchback. So adjustable poles are nice for that. Adjustable poles are also nice for ascent height versus descent height. Some people like to have fun coming down and kind of do jump turns and play. So a little bit shorter pole is a little bit nicer for that, more like a ski pole versus like a cross-country pole or a snowshoe pole. So shortening that pole down for that is kind of nice. And then the last thing is make sure you have a good powder basket on it. You want something with some size for flotation. So I don't know if we can see this, but there's a powder basket there that goes with this pole. It sits at about this diameter. So something like about this diameter will keep your pole floating quite well, and if you have to stabilize yourself, it should catch you. You know what? I hope I've given you some information about snowshoeing that you can use. If you have any questions, pop into your local shop and I'm sure they'd be happy to help you out and size you up for a snowshoe. Thanks for watching. This has been Gear Up.